We are back. We are back really soon.
That the prosecution failed to prove that he was not.
Kyle Rittenhouse was just found not guilty on all counts.
It's significant legally, but really it is significant on this debate we're having in the country.
Getting caught up with this,
who's carrying them, and certainly this was a Black Lives Matter protest. Kenosha has about 10-12% Black community here, and they are no doubt disappointed in this verdict because this came out of the protests that were sweeping the country last year, and it was also seen in that context as well. So it's a very significant verdict.
And Terry, you made that key point about self-defense there. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, because that's entirely what the defense was all about here. And the prosecution tried to point out that it was, in fact, Rittenhouse who was provoking the situation, going into a volatile situation with an AR-15. But at the end of the day, through testimony, through videos, time and time again, the defense made the case that these people, these protesters, were pursuing him, and Rittenhouse saying that that was a threat to his life.
You know, Terry made a point there that I think is the single most important thing to remember when looking at this case. And that is that the prosecution had to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. So that means that if you're a juror on this case and you've looked at the videos and you say to yourself, you know, I don't really think that this is self-defense, but it's close, that's a not guilty verdict. You have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the prosecution has proven that case such that self-defense simply is no longer on the table, so to speak. And that legal standard is critical. I think we talk a lot about sort of the lesser included offenses and the provocation and all. That issue, singularly, on the question of the prosecution having the burden to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt is the most important one. And I think probably was the reason that this didn't end up being that hard a legal case for these jurors. So remember, this is not a judgment by this jury on whether Kyle Rittenhouse did the right thing. It's not a judgment by this jury on whether he should have been there at all, whether he should have had that weapon. This is simply a legal judgment on whether he should have his freedom taken away based on legal standards that they were told, instructed to apply by this judge.
Dan, thank you. I do want to bring in our ABC contributor and legal analyst, Shauna Lloyd, as well. She's joining us on the phone. And Shauna,
response,
I wanted to ask you about Rittenhouse. We see him there again. These are from moments ago, his emotional response to the verdict.
Yeah, there you go.
But the fact that he testified in his own trial. For those who supported him, they thought that he showed remorse and perhaps showed that he never intended to hurt anyone.
Look at him. He's
For those
such a
who opposed
dramatic
him,
little bitch.
there's very much this idea that maybe it was a performance, alligator tears. But put public opinion to the side. How significant was his testimony in his own trial?
Wow, man.
I think, for these jurors, it was quite significant. What they wanted to see was why he felt like he needed to be in this posture of self-defense. And I think that's what they got from him. I think these jurors heard his story and felt like he was in a mode where he had to defend himself, that he had no other choice. That was what he conveyed on the stand through his testimony. And I think that is what the jurors did identify with, because in these self-defense cases, they wanted
who decided he would bring his AR-15 to a Black Lives Matters protest and turn the motherfucker upside down. He shot and killed 2 people. He maimed a 3rd. And that motherfucker just was found not guilty. I don't mean that, sometimes, guys, when people go in a court and, they're found guilty or not guilty on from a legal standpoint, look at this shit. Look at this dramatic. Look at this little baby. Man, yeah, he needs to grow up. He needs to grow the fuck up. It's time to grow up, Kyle. You have shot and killed 2 people, 2 human beings. The judge has been throwing out indicators of bias in this trial. I'm sorry. Let me be a little more respectful, y'all. Let's get the rest of this. Hold on, let me just calm down for a minute.
This was recorded from multiple angles, cell phone videos, live streams, drone video. How significant was that video evidence in coming to this verdict?
I think it's absolutely critical. I think this is one of those incredibly rare cases where the defendant taking the witness stand may not have been the singular most important issue in the case. Most of the time when a defendant takes the witness stand, the case comes down to that. Do the jurors find him to be credible? But in a case where you have video evidence, in this case, you're going to have that become the most important evidence in the case. And there were numerous videos. Remember, there were effectively two scenes here. One where Joseph Rosenbaum is shot, and then they move forward to this other scene where the other two were shot. And there is video, different videos, different angles of these scenes. And I think that when these jurors were evaluating the case and they asked to have it back, they wanted to see it again before they came to this verdict. It shows you how important that video was in this context. And again, when you're thinking about beyond a reasonable doubt, if there's ambiguity, if there's uncertainty on that video, that works to the defendant's advantage.
Dan, thank you. I want to go back to Terry Moran out there because, Terry, tensions, emotions running so high surrounding this case. We mentioned earlier that the governor activated the National Guard to be ready for protests or any potential incidents. Do we have any sense of what we might expect today?
Well, so far, the protests in front of the courthouse during the course of this trial have been very, very small, far more reporters than protesters. This verdict could change that. It could indeed. The shooting of Jacob Blake last year, who I misspoke, he survived, he's paralyzed, he did not die. That was an eruption of emotion on the streets of Kenosha. It was an eruption at the time. The whole country was on the streets, it seemed, after the killing of George Floyd. It's a somewhat different situation right now. It's colder out. It tends to discourage people from doing that kind of thing. But we will see that the schools have gone to all virtual education over the past couple of days in anticipation of this verdict. The governor has the National Guard on standby. But I don't get the feeling at this point that you would see the same kind of eruption. Let's see what happens tonight. And finally, this sense that this case did come to stand for more. A lot of people are concerned about the gun culture in this country. And Kyle Rittenhouse and the others who were on that street, after several nights of protests had turned violent and businesses had been destroyed, it looked as if the country was coming apart, perhaps with some people armed on one side. And that is why so many people on the left are upset about this case and probably about this verdict. It remains a problem in this country. We can't solve problems through violence, whether with burning down businesses or with guns. And I think that is the lasting impact of this case.
All right, Terry Moran, thanks once again for your coverage throughout this trial. Kyle Rittenhouse, not guilty on all counts. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live and abcnews.com, and you can get breaking news alerts on the ABC News app. David Muir and the entire team at World News Tonight will have a full wrap-up later on this evening. For now, I'm Wade Johnson in New York. Have a good day.
And hello, everyone. You are continuing to watch breaking news coverage here regarding the...
Yeah, talk about punch to the gut, right? Feeling a certain kind of way. You can't help but to feel a certain kind of way. It sort of feels like an irresponsible man just got away with murder. That's what it feels like. Almost like a Casey Anthony.
You mentioned those dramatic images, but these are also dramatic images happening outside of the
Kenosha courthouse right now. People gathered there. This trial closely watched and scrutinized across the country.
Rittenhouse charged with shooting and killing
Rhonda,
two protesters and wounding a third man with an AR-15 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, back in August.
I've been feeling a kind of way too about that. Watch the dramatics, y'all. Watch him get all dramatic.
Not guilty, not guilty,
Look at
not
this.
guilty,
Not guilty, not guilty. All 5 counts there for Kyle Rittenhouse. His knees seemed to buckle. He fell back into that chair. His lawyers are trying to tell him to breathe.
He looks like a little baby right there.
Because obviously this is a moment that he had been waiting for since that incident happened. Of course, at the crux of their case and at the center of their case was a self-defense argument there. as Terry Moran.
And you wonder why
Terry Moran
people
just mentioned
feel
our special
like
report on ABC
there's no
News,
justice in this
there were
country.
many protests happening in the streets across the country. But that was a case where everyone was watching because there was video.
And his mother, right at that moment, you can see his mother crying, his sister with her hand on her mouth as those not guilty
drop kick that bitch in the face.
You can see his two sisters next to his mother crying in tears. They were brought into that courtroom before the verdict.
Breathe deep, Kyle. Breathe in deep.
And
George Zimmerman wrote, yep.
For that family, their prayers were answered. Again, another shot of Kyle Rittenhouse.
Look
you can see, as you pointed out, his knees buckling, shaking, dropping to the ground,
that boy don't
having
sit
to
down,
be lifted
so
back up, holding on to his defense attorney there.
Before that verdict was read, the judge
is there any tears in his eyes?
We're going to whisk you
Fake
out of here
ass.
fast.
Oh my
depending
Lord,
on what the
y'all.
verdict is, and if it was
I
not
can make
guilty,
fun of him.
he was going to be rushed out of there, and he was. The moment after that, we saw him leave that courtroom pretty fast with
Look
law
at the
enforcement
dramatics,
presence around
y'all.
him.
Give him some water.
Let's bring in
Your national correspondent, Terry Moran, former homicide prosecutor Bernarda Villalona, and trial attorney C.K. Hoffler, the former president of the National Bar Association. Thank you all for joining us. Let's get right to our Terry Moran, who was in that courtroom during some of these days of the trial, outside of the courtroom now. Terry, what can you tell us?
Well, when I was inside the courtroom, you could tell that the jurors were leaning in to this case. This was not a jury where people were falling asleep or dawdling in their duties. They were certainly focused on this case, and that was good to see. They took their time with it. This was seen by a lot of people around the country as kind of a slam dunk for the defense after Kyle Rittenhouse testified. And in fact, the prosecution had major problems in this case. Some of their witnesses kind of blew up on them on the witness stand and opened the door for some evidence helpful to Kyle Rittenhouse to come in. But in his summation, in his closing argument, Prosecutor Thomas Binger did manage to pull this together and paint a picture of a young man out on the street with a gun who was not under control and not at critical moments truly threatened with great bodily harm or that he would be killed. The jury didn't buy it at the end, but they sure did think about it. And it's clear from their requests. They went methodically through first the law and then the evidence. And at the very end, it was the first shooting, it seemed. Their last request was for the video of the killing of Joseph Rosenbaum, who was the first person that Kyle Rittenhouse shot that night. And it was that one that they seemed to go over at the end. There were no questions or requests for evidence or law explanations on the law yesterday. So that was where they went. One more legal note, which is that Kyle Rittenhouse is free now. He will not face criminal sanction for what he did that night, but he could be sued civilly for wrongful death, for injuring Gage Grosskreutz. So his legal problems may not be over because that will be a different stand. It might be harder for him to raise the self-defense issue. But on this instance, where he faced life imprisonment, he is acquitted on all the counts.
Hey, Ned, I
Bernarda,
see you, baby.
clearly,
How are you?
The prosecution could not disprove that self-defense case.
Yeah, so the jury has spoken. The state of Wisconsin, the jury has spoken in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, and they determined that he is not guilty. They have acquitted him. They have determined that on August 25th of 2020, Kyle Rittenhouse was actually the victim and not the vigilante. Unfortunately, prosecution was not able to bring a strong enough case to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kyle Rittenhouse did not act in self-defense. That wasn't reasonable, his actions. And that's why you have the verdict that you have. But we've been seeing that this would be the verdict for the last couple of days based on how all the evidence went in, and as well as after Kyle Rittenhouse testified and he put on that performance. And as you can see, the jury bought it.
And C.K. Hoffler, is this a just verdict?
You know, I will answer by saying this. The jury has spoken. I think that the prosecution failed, obviously, in presenting the evidence during its case in chief. They brought it in closing, but it was a little too late. I'm not surprised by this verdict. Is it just? I'm concerned about the ramifications of this, and that leads me to believe that it's not just, that this young man will not be held accountable, and that others will feel that they can do just what Kyle Rittenhouse did. and get away with it and not be held accountable. And so in that sense, I think it's not just. But this is how our system works. And the jury has spoken. And once a jury has spoken, it's over. It's done. Certainly you can appeal it, but it's done. And so I define justice by the jury speaking. There are a lot of appealable issues in this case. I am concerned about the ramifications of this verdict and the signal that it is sending to the country and to the world, indeed, that you can break up a protest, parade with a shotgun or an assault rifle, an assault weapon, even if it is illegal for you to do so because you're 17. And you will not be held accountable. That's going to be the ultimate message. And I think this really, really is a very devastating result for probably the civil rights community, because after all, this was a march, this was a protest in honor of Jacob Blake, who was shot as a young Black man by a white police officer. So I think that the jury spoke. I respect the jury. I respect that system. Is it just? I have a sense of not feeling good about this outcome because of what it could mean in our society. And it's a reminder of all the work that we have to do to level the playing field in this country.
Bernarda, let's expand on that, because there was definitely a turning point in this trial when Kyle Rittenhouse took the stand. And we can't forget that moment when he was describing shooting Joseph Rosenbaum, and he started hyperventilating. He started crying. He broke down. The judge had to hand him a bottle of water. They had to take a break. Clearly, the PTS taking hold there. And we found out in this court proceeding that he was going through a therapy for PTS. Do you think that moment played a part in these not guilty reads, that the jury at that moment saw Kyle Rittenhouse in a different way?
Absolutely. I think the performance that was given by Kyle Rittenhouse had a huge impact on the jury verdict, a huge impact on the thinking and the deliberations of this jury. Because you have to think, I think, number one, it left you with an image that you can't take out of your mind. And just imagine that jury was experiencing it right there, front and center. So it's something that they took with them, as well as the image of the mother crying as well. But also what was more important about Kyle Rittenhouse's testimony when he testified is that the jury had to decide in regards to self-defense. They needed to know, not just from the video, not just from his actions about what happened, but rather what was in his mind when he decided to pull the trigger of an AR-15 rifle that contained 30 cartridges. And I think by him testifying and giving them that piece of evidence, that gave him some kind of doubt as to the charges in this case. And again, when we're talking about proving your case beyond a reasonable doubt, if you have a doubt that is reasonable based on facts that have been presented at trial, then technically what you have to do, not technically, by law, you have to acquit him. And that is what the jury did in this case. In regards to them focusing on Joseph Rosenbaum, I thought if the prosecution had any count that they can win on, had any chance of prevailing on, I thought it was with Joseph Rosenbaum.
All right, let's bring in former NYPD Chief of Detectives and ABC News contributor Bob Boyce into this discussion. And Bob, I have to ask you, as a former law enforcement officer, do you think this verdict gives people a license in their communities when there's a Black Lives Matter demonstration happening that could potentially get violent, for them to take up arms and to go in the street and to, quote unquote, protect their communities?
Absolutely not. This is a jury system that went through 4 days of deliberation, a lot of testimony, both pro and con. Prosecution and defense. So no one gives the right to burn down buildings. No, this is our system of justice, whether you like it or not. Doesn't give you any right to go out and start burning buildings and throwing rocks and all kinds of that behavior. So hopefully now the National Guard is deployed into the business sector there, so they won't have the same things they had this August of 2020. So hopefully that won't happen. but we'll see how on point the police will be, as well as the National Guard, in stemming any violence attributed to this case. No one has the right to do that. They do have a right to peacefully assemble, which they will, but not violence ever.
Terry Moran, let's talk about the video evidence for a moment. Clearly, there were two very pivotal moments during this trial. One was when Kyle Rittenhouse took the stand and he broke down, as Bernarda said, gave quite a performance that clearly made an impact on this jury. But the video evidence, there was a turn of events this week when the jury had two questions for the judge, one being, could they review the video if they wanted to, and could they do that in private, or would it have to be in the courtroom? The judge saying by law they would have to view it in the courtroom, and they wanted to see that drone video again, and they watched it for about 46 to 49 minutes, I believe. I can't remember the exact time, but what did you make of that? Do you think that's because there was somebody in among those jurors that wasn't quite sure if they thought, he had provoked the situation, Kyle Rittenhouse had provoked the violence and the killing of Joseph Rosenbaum at that moment? Go into a little bit of detail about that time this week when they wanted to review that video specifically.
Well, that may, Kira, be what happened inside that jury room. That's my own reading as well. If you look at the way they asked the judge questions, 5 questions, they said, can we have first the law, the first 6 pages or so of the jury instructions, which dealt with the law of self-defense and how you cannot raise it if you provoke the attack, provocation. That's what they wanted to look like, and the first look at, and the first count about the killing of Joseph Rosenbaum. And then they wanted the video evidence, a lot of it. And then at the very end, the last thing they want was the video evidence about the killing of Joseph Rosenbaum. That was before Kyle Rittenhouse was chased down the street. It was just him and Rosenbaum at that point. And so it does seem to me, there was a juror who said last night she wanted to take the jury instructions home. The judge allowed her, perhaps, and this is total speculation, she wanted to satisfy in her own mind that she was doing the right thing, because clearly that jury was moving towards acquittal. And what the video evidence did here, and so much of our lives is now on video that it is kind of changing the courtroom behavior. Now fake video is next, right? Those deep fakes. But this was not. This was ordinary cell phones, that drone video. And what it does is it allows jurors to go out on that street themselves in an experiential way. So they don't have to really just say, this person says he felt threatened, this person says he wasn't threatened, this person said he ran at him, this person says he doesn't. The credibility contest, it still is a huge part of being a juror. But because they had those videos, they could A, back up one side, one version or another, and B, get some sense, secondhand but vivid, would I be in fear for my life or great bodily harm? That's the standard in the law. Would a reasonable person put in the same situation feel fear for their lives or fear that they would suffer great bodily harm? That's the law. So they have to imaginatively project themselves into Kyle Rittenhouse's situation. And the video helps you do that. We can all do that. And I think that made it a harder case for prosecutors, frankly, because when you've just got a defendant on the stand saying, I feared for my life, you can tear him apart on cross-examination and raise questions about his credibility. But with the video, you can see he gets kicked in the head, right? There are people throwing things at him, bashing him with the skateboard. You can't say on cross-examination, well, so you say. Well, you don't have any proof of that, because there is proof. And I think the video evidence was absolutely critical, whether or not, if people who watched it believe that it backed up what Kyle Rittenhouse is saying is one thing. This jury still did. And it also shows that time they wanted in the courtroom to go over it themselves after they'd discussed it for a couple of days, this jury worked exactly the way we want jurors to work. It seems to me methodically, carefully, together, reaching a conclusion. On social media, everywhere else, everybody's 100% certain of what the verdict should have been one way or another. But certainty on Twitter is cheap. In the jury room, it is hard earned, and this jury seems to me to have earned it.
All right.
Guys, well, I'll speak more on this probably later tonight. Probably going to hit up a couple other CCs and see if they want to do a live stream to talk, further about this case. We'll definitely keep our eyes on it and see how things proceed over the day today. Like now, yeah, Natalie, it is. That's how I feel too. Like, and I'm allowed to have those feelings. I'm allowed. Damn it, I know I got to sometimes be careful what I say, but damn it, sometimes my raw feelings come out. And yeah, that's, I think, how a lot of people are feeling today. So, guys, I'll catch you guys soon. Much love, everybody. And shout out to Dolly Lamas T for hitting me up and letting me know. And Natalie, all you guys, actually. I'm very appreciative of all you guys. Thanks. I'll catch y'all soon.